Hello, Kentucky. Matt Tackett, excited to welcome you to the latest edition of the KAED Netcast. By now, you know how it goes. Every episode, we have a very special guest, and we certainly do today as we're excited to welcome Lee Crume, the president and CEO of Northern Kentucky Triad, to the Netcast. Now, Lee has been in his position for a short amount of time, but has had an incredible impact as he's led a total reimagination of organization and strategy at Northern Kentucky Triad. We're going to talk about his approach. We're going to talk about what makes Northern Kentucky successful and special in economic development. And we're also going to put him on the hot seat to get to know him a little better. So we thank you, Lee Crume, President and CEO of Northern Kentucky Triad. Welcome to the Netcast. Okay, so welcome back. As we say, we always have a special guest, and we certainly do today, as we're really thrilled to have Lee Crume, the president and CEO of Northern Kentucky Triad, with us. We know how valuable your time is, and we're looking forward to just a really incredible conversation. There's a lot of weeds to get into with you. You know, people at KAED know that I use the word reimagination a lot. There's even some things around that, but now you have done it in Northern Kentucky, and I'm so excited to talk about that with you and just really dive into what makes Triad successful and what makes Northern Kentucky such a great place to live and work. So we just thank you for being here. But before we dive in, hey, Lee, how's everybody at Northern Kentucky Triad?
First, Matt, thanks for having me on board. Certainly our schedules are busy. We know everybody's busy these days, dealing with a lot of things, a lot of balls in the air. So I appreciate your having me on. I'm really glad to be here on a beautiful Friday afternoon. Fortunately for Triad, you asked the question, how's everybody doing? We're very lucky. Everybody in the organization is happy and healthy. We've had a couple members of our support staff's family that have had COVID-19, so we've seen the effects of the pandemic locally. Fortunately, thank God they've all made a full recovery and everybody's happy and healthy at current. And hopefully as we continue to move forward, people keep using good common sense, and let's keep this thing muted so we can get back to a full recovery.
Yeah, no doubt. So we just appreciate the leadership on behalf of your staff and on behalf of this whole Commonwealth. And I'm excited to dig into that a little bit. But, I know you're a Kentuckian and you've had experience inside and outside of Kentucky. So curious to tell us a little bit about you and what led you ultimately to the seat at Northern Kentucky Triad.
Yeah, Matt, I joked when I was interviewing for this job that my family came to Kentucky when it was a place called Virginia. So our roots run very deep. My father's family settled in what would become Nelson County while it was still the 18th century. So late 1700s, they came out here on a Revolutionary War land grant. My mom's family came out a couple of decades later in the south central part of the state. So we've been in Kentucky a very long time. I was born in Bowling Green, raised in Owensboro, went to college at Western Kentucky. So I'm a proud hilltopper. And had an opportunity to, after I finished college, like a lot of people do, they kind of want to see the world. So I don't know that I saw the world, but I moved around a little bit, went to Alabama, went to Michigan. And then ultimately, my career and family settled me in Columbus, Ohio. I had an opportunity to work in the private sector there for many years. And then finally, a couple of years ago, this opportunity opened up, which not only brings me to Northern Kentucky Triad, but really brings me home to the state of Kentucky.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to talking about just a short amount of time, what a big amount of impact that you've had there at Triad, and that proliferates all across this Commonwealth. But when I get the chance to talk to seasoned people like you, I'm always curious as to, with your experience and the time that you've served, you've had to have seen our profession evolve a couple of times, maybe more. So can you talk a little bit about how things have changed from maybe day one for you to now, and maybe a few projections or one about where we're going in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I appreciate being called seasoned. Most people are starting to just call me old at this point, and you notice people start opening the door for you every time you go out. So season's a vast improvement. To answer your question, I got into economic development in 2013, so 7 years ago. 7 years doesn't sound like a terribly long time, but you think about from an economic perspective, we were still coming out of the Great Recession at that point. It was really interesting. Our industry at that point was really selling and focused on excess capacity. Unemployment rate in a lot of areas was still in the 4s and 5s. Underemployment was still a significant issue. And so we could work with clients to help absorb that existing, especially labor capacity in the market. Boy, that really started to flip maybe in the 2015 timeframe. And from 2015 through the beginning of this year, our whole industry was about workforce. It was a battle on how do you make sure that we can get the right type of talent and labor created in our market? How do you make sure there's connectivity with educational institutions so that they can have those types of jobs? And so we spent several years working in that, working with that focus. And it was really funny when the unemployment rate is at 3%, you've got labor participation rate, especially in Northern Kentucky, pushing 70%. You started to hear people around the country start talking about, well, do we even need economic development anymore? We're full up. And then all it takes is one global pandemic to come along, and you realize how important that our industry is to step in and help our communities and our businesses cross this divide that's created by the pandemic to hopefully be successful again. So, long story short there, in 7 short years, I've seen at least 3 full big swings and trends in this industry that we as economic developers have had to prepare and respond to.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to talking to you a little bit about some of the consequences and the reactions to COVID that we're all doing together. But, I've learned, so I think you came to Triads in April of last year. And I've got a story about that later. But I've learned a lot from watching you in real time, learned a lot as far as being a leader of an organization, not just an economic development organization, but especially watching you for economic development. But I heard you once say in an executive meeting that we were having down here in Frankfurt that you have to be operational before aspiration. And I wrote on to that, and I've really learned from watching you put that in practice. So for those, and I know a lot are familiar, but for those that maybe aren't, can you talk about just the reimagination that you've done to organization and strategy at your office?
Sure. Yeah, you have to understand who Northern Kentucky Triad is a little bit, I think, to answer that question. So the company itself, it's a 33-year-old company, has been very successful, very well led through the years. And it starts to go through a disruption, as you often see. People start to leave an organization. And this company experienced a disruption that really started about 2 years ago. My predecessor decided to leave and pursue other interests. And then shortly thereafter, most of the other staff pursued other career interests. So when I took over the organization, our most tenured person had been here about 6 months. And we had maybe half a dozen people in the total organization, and we wanted to get to about 14 or 15 or something like that. And so, really operational before aspirational was a little bit about setting expectations for our board, because you're hired into a job and everybody suddenly, they want to win the Super Bowl. They want to go out and do deals and bring things in. And when we looked at the organization, we said, boy, there's some really fundamental things that we need to do to get to so that we can play the game, so that we can win the Super Bowl. And so we spent a good portion of last year doing those really not very sexy and exciting operational things, very foundational things. And through the course of most of last year, we addressed things like accounting and budgeting, and how we addressed our technology, we addressed our physical space. Maybe in hindsight wasn't the right time to address physical space. We went from having all offices to an open office space. So in the COVID-19 world, maybe I'd take a do-over on that. But we hired a bunch of people, we trained people, we adjusted HR and employment policies, the whole gamut of things. And then by the time we got to the back half of the year, we had a lot of that in place. And then it was about just practicing. How do we get good as practitioners in this space, so that, when we go and engage a client, we're asking the right questions, or when we're talking to our community leaders, we understand what they need and how to get them into the game to grow the economy. And we were really, a lot of times you get lucky. But we were in a really good spot once we came out at the beginning of this year to start executing on some of that work we had done last year. So that's really what that operational before aspirational meant for Northern Kentucky Triad.
Yeah, and there's been so much good media that's came out, and so many success stories. And I know at KAED we've kind of concurrently been walking through a similar process, certainly not at the scale or not as successfully as you, but I've learned a lot from watching you, learning your approach and your strategies, and how you look at kind of the holistic governance of an organization. So I appreciate that from you from a leadership perspective, and we'll talk about marketing. I know there's a lot to learn from you on that, but even on just the everyday people at KAED know I've always got my little brown book with me. That's a Northern Kentucky Triad.
There you go.
I carry it everywhere I go. It's been literally all across the world with me. So you're always your presence is
Perfect. Matt, I would tell you, I was very fortunate that when I was at Western Kentucky, I had an opportunity to go to work for UPS. And so I started out with UPS like a lot of people do, working in the package center. And then I was very fortunate to get promoted there. And I spent about 5 years with UPS. And it really, for me, it laid down that fundamental of how do you be a good company? How do you have good processes and good measurement around things? How do you treat people well? How do you hold them accountable? And, you just think about the things you don't really plan, but again, you kind of get lucky on. And for me, that all started back in those days coming out of that environment and have carried through. We think about the company that we want to be, the professionals that we want to be. We want to be really good at our craft. We want to be reliable and trustworthy. And that comes from, knowing what your job is, knowing how to execute it, knowing how to work at a high level. And we've worked really hard to be that company for our community.
Yeah, absolutely. So many best practices emerge from your organization. So let's talk about Northern Kentucky. And a strong suit for you is identifying and leveraging both kind of the intrinsic attributes of a community and the manufactured attributes that you have. So can you talk to us a little bit about Northern Kentucky and what makes it a special place?
Yeah. Well, there's everybody feels strongly about where they're from and the things that make it a special place. I won't really talk about those from an economic perspective. There's just some things you can't replicate, right? Like where are you located on the map? What are you next to? In this day and age, you can't choose to have a university 5 miles away or one right across the river. And those are all attributes that become very unique. So what are some of the things that play well for Northern Kentucky from a strength? Where we are on the map. A lot of economic developers talk about that. But when you really get out and measure, there's a finite part of the map that can service customers in a day all the way from Toronto to Atlanta. And we're the northern end of that is maybe Columbus, the southern end of that is maybe Lexington, and who sits right smack dab in the middle of that is us. So, just good geography. We're very lucky with that. We're part of a major metropolitan area. We are Northern Kentucky. We are part of the Bluegrass State, but we're also part of the Cincinnati metropolitan area, which is a vibrant, growing metropolitan area, which gives us, really unique access to universities and talent and, baseball and football and things of that nature. So that's a very strong attribute for us that we try to leverage, and again, I wasn't here 150 years ago, but you have these companies that are legacies that have grown and that we can springboard off of. So whether it's a Procter & Gamble or it's a Kroger or it's a Bosch or a Mobile or a Safran that are here that create an industry base that we can build off today. Again, those are all attributes that we have in Northern Kentucky that allow us to do our work today.
Yeah, and you so successfully leverage that, and for that we owe you a thank you. And you're right about just kind of the geographic blessings that we have here in Kentucky. Look, no competitor can manufacture that. We're within a day's drive of 2/3 of the population.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, guess what? We've got 3 global air shipping hubs. Nobody else does. You're a big piece of that. And we can put any product anywhere in the world overnight. Yeah, right.
Yep.
Right in Kentucky. So I say all that wondering, and I hope I didn't steal any of your thunder there, knowing that you are so successful and a strong marketer, and knowing that you are in a Kentucky and in a community that is so well positioned for success. I'm curious what your message, and maybe a little bit more than an elevator pitch, looks like to CEOs or site location consultants as you're traveling across the world advocating on our behalf.
Hey, you know where our elevator pitch really starts? It starts with a question, and the question is, what are the client's requirements? Because while we understand we have a lot of attributes, just like any product, that attributes only matter if that's what will benefit you. So when we sit down with a client, our conversation is, what is it that you need? What is it that will help you be successful? And if it is things like we would need to be, global access, as you just discussed with with CVG and the proximity as well to the global hub with UPS in Louisville. Is it access to a river? Is it access to the highways? What kind of talent mix do you need? We want to understand from our client's perspective what are those attributes, and then we can start to give our pitch as to how we may or may not fit those. We come into these conversations recognizing maybe we're not right for everybody. And we think the best thing that we can do is help our clients navigate that decision process and help them make a good decision. And if that means it's not Northern Kentucky today, hopefully they'll remember the good experience with us. And when the attributes do line up for us, then we'll be there for them.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective too, because I think there's power in saying, look, we hope we're the right fit for you, but if we're not, we'll help you figure that out.
Yep.
I think and we'll help you do so quickly. So I think there's certainly power in that. Not a funny story, but I knew, and I started doing my research and homework on you long before you were placed in Kentucky at Triad, and that's because as we were going across North America doing our marketing, we were visiting with active site location consultants, communication with them, but shortly before you came to Triad, honestly, probably 3 or 4 different markets, or 2 or 3, but a handful, would tell me, hey, oh, by the way, congrats on getting Lee Crume.
Yeah.
and not only that, several of them told me he came up here personally to say goodbye on behalf of his former employer and to thank us for the relationship that we've had. And I found that that has stuck with me because, this is obviously a relationship profession that's important, but just the hustle and the power of touches like that really stuck with me. So I appreciate the way that you do and go about your marketing. And now also Kimberly Rossetti in your office chairs our marketing program United. So we definitely thank you for what you're doing and your leadership on Kentucky United.
Yeah, Matt, a little bit of credit has to go to, so I came from Jobs Ohio. I think a lot of people know that. Some credit there has to go to Jobs Ohio, because so often when you go to change jobs, they throw you right out the door. Jobs Ohio saw the big picture. They also knew that we had a good team in place, and so that we had the capacity to make a really nice transition, which benefited their organization. And, there certainly was a little bit of benefit for Kentucky as I moved into this organization as well. So that's nice of you to point that out. And yeah, it's important. Like it's a small world, and you're going to continue to work with people. It's funny how at times you pass out of jobs or industries and you think, well, I'll never see that person again. And then all of a sudden, there they are. I'll give you a great example that just popped in my head. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I worked in an industry. There was a guy in Cincinnati I worked with on a couple of deals. Hadn't seen him for 20 years. I come down here. He's the mayor of Highland Heights, Kentucky. He's on my board. So it's a very small world, and when you find out you treat people well, it tends to pay off. So, and you mentioned Kimberly. I got to tell you, we're so fortunate that she threw up her hand and said that she would come work up here. And I'm very fortunate that Lexington will let her come up here. We needed somebody with immense skill and talent, and that knew the state of Kentucky's programs. And boy, she's been a real treat in the organization.
Well, us too. I mean, what a leader that she is, and we've obviously been disrupted by COVID, and that'll be kind of the next topic here. But Kentucky United, we travel all across North America, internationally. Kimberly leads that committee and leads the strategy output from that. And you'll see from the committee, from KAED, we're recording this, I think it's June 19th, but within the next few days, we'll have a new virtual model. So we've adjusted through her leadership to really make sure that we're on the forefront of consultants' minds so that they understand the benefits of and advantages of doing business.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Kimberly's just an incredible asset to us, and we thank Triad for allowing her to lead. But we mentioned COVID. We've all obviously been disrupted, but I've noticed that Triad continues to excel and lead during this period. So can you talk about how that's changed, at least your last few months and maybe the next few?
Yep, glad to. When this thing broke out, you started to see it build. Like a lot of people, we didn't know what this meant. If you go back to late February and early March, the second week of March, Kimberly and another colleague were actually down in Atlanta traveling for work. I actually took a vacation day and went to Florida, which you hindsight being 2020, you think, wow, that was probably not a great choice. But we didn't know. So, the COVID world kind of broke on us in mid-March. Triad, we changed our work structure. We said, okay, this is going to be a thing. We're going to make some adjustments for it. Probably going to affect our, capacity. So we'll have some extra capacity. We'll do some training. We'll make sure we're good practitioners, and we'll move through this thing. That strategy, call that version 1.0, lasted 1 week. And as we got through that first week, we were like, wow, this is going to be much bigger than what we thought. It's going to have dramatic impacts on our community from an economy perspective. It's going to have dramatic impacts on Triad. And we had to make a very strategic decision about halfway through week 1. And that decision was, do you draw back? Do you preserve your resources? Or do you just go all in? And I thought of it, we spent a year building this company. We cannot sit on the sidelines while our community suffers, while our businesses suffer. And so, there's going to be a financial reckoning for Triad, to be quite honest with you, in the next year. We're going to really hurt from a revenue perspective, and we could have made other decisions back in March, but we said we're not going to do that. We're going to go in, we're going to help companies, we're going to help communities. And we immediately, there was the third week of March, we put almost everybody in the organization on business retention. Everybody from our administrative staff, we do entrepreneurship service for Northern Kentucky. There were days we had our entrepreneurship team doing BRE calls, checking in with companies. How are you? What do you need? How can we help? Who can we connect you with? Through the COVID period, we've recorded 1,000 BRE touch points with companies, and that's phone calls, emails, web meetings, a couple of in-person meetings, believe it or not, to make sure that they're okay. So, we weighed in really, really hard, and that kind of middle section lasted really through about mid-May. And now it seems as though in the last couple of weeks we've hit a new section. We continue to see economic development deals. We're seeing new development. The stress level seems a little bit down a little bit. So I feel like we're almost now in kind of this almost like maybe we're in the eye, time to do some work, but is there something else coming on the other side? Is there another wave coming? We're just kind of sitting in between these two posts. So.
Yeah. And I think for us, the major, and we're a different animal. I mean, we've obviously been big time disrupted. We've canceled major gatherings, and we've canceled some of our marketing outreach. But I think the biggest shift that we strategically and intentionally did was we're going to focus most of our energy on business retention and expansion. Yeah. For us, it was, okay, let's ensure that there's a qualified strategy and ownership of process everywhere across this Commonwealth, so that we can kind of best position ourselves for the now and on the emergent time from COVID. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of BRE and a standardized, formalized process? Because I think there's some communities that watch these that maybe for the first time be looking to stand up and launch a BRE program, or maybe make tweaks to what they currently have.
Yep. Yeah, BRE was maybe it was one of the first programs we started retooling when I got here last year. So for people that don't know, I have a private industry, a business development background. So I worked in business development for many years. And so again, that kind of that UPS mindset on process, business development, and we knew we needed to get really good at that process. We also knew that because of the disruption that I talked about that Triad went through, a lot of our relationships were in the community had been severed because of that. So it was really, really important for us. Again, sometimes you just get lucky. We had a member on our team, Angie Mulberry, who had been hired in January of last year. So she had just joined the organization from the private sector. She threw her hand up and said, "Hey, I think I can do this." And it was one of those where you look at it and you're like, well, you have no business development. You've never worked as a business developer anywhere, but we took a chance, and you're just like, just this incredible lucky coincidence that she said she would do that for us. So we got the right person. We actually have hired an outside consulting firm that helps us with the process of that. So they help us from both kind of the data side and identifying potential, companies inside the community that we need to connect with. They help us with that connection to really try to tee things up for Angie so that she can be efficient when she's working with companies. And then they've helped us with special projects as well. And we've taken on some special projects. A good example would be as we move through this COVID arc, we've just kicked off a program of CEO roundtables, and we're doing them virtually, just like this conversation today. So we identified what we thought were 70 key business leaders in Northern Kentucky, and we've been reaching out to them, which is, it's both a CEO conversation, but it's just fundamental business retention to understand. The conversation has been, what has the impact been, and what do you need to grow out of this? What risks are out there that could keep you from growing out of this? And we hear a lot about, we got to get those daycares open. We got to get those schools open. We can't get our people back to work because they, their kids are at home and they're homeschooling and things of that nature. So trying to understand what those challenges are. So we work through that. Economic development is just like most businesses that are out there in the world. 70-80% of your business comes from existing clients. We recognize that, and so we've really pumped the resources, the energy, and our financial resources into BRE.
Us as well. We're spending a lot of time on that, and typically with KAED programming or membership associations, usually we have to try to monetize our services or our content, but not on BRE. This is important, and we've made everything that we've done on that up to this point. Significant amount of hours and energy and content available for free across Kentucky. And, we're seeing communities launch programs. We're seeing communities use some of the materials that we're releasing. I'm so proud that we were able to do that. And you're right about where the new investment comes from, certainly in the Commonwealth or in private industry. But, we've talked about marketing some too. So what does the balance look like for you, or what would be kind of just a communication throughout Kentucky about kind of the strategic and the holistic approach, and specifically the BRE versus marketing balance or business attraction?
Yeah, I want to go back one thing on the BRE, especially for local communities, and we talk about this a lot. If there's only one thing you can know in a BRE visit, if it's a company that is not headquartered in your community, we always try to picture that at their corporate office, there's a stack ranking. And you want to know where your facility is on that stack ranking and whether they're in line to get the next round of capital investment or not. And if they're on the not list, then you got to figure out what, as a local community, you can get them up on that. And I can tell you, I've had experiences where we sat with companies and we said, we won't get future investment because water is too expensive in our town, or water capacity. We can't get enough water capacity at our plant. That's a fundamental challenge that you can take on. We can't get additional investment because ingress, egress out of our plant is too slow and it affects our logistics. And so I would encourage all of my colleagues in Kentucky, if there's one thing you can know about an existing company is where on that, kind of sometimes it's an actual list, but on that virtual stack ranking that is at that corporate headquarters, where is your facility and what do you have to do to move them up into the green zone for investment? So I hard pivoted, John, there, Matt, and now I forgot the original question you asked me.
Well, that was helpful because we're constantly refining the formalized and the surveys and the questions that we're saying, here's what you need to implement into your strategy. So I'll write that down and make sure that we're covering that in the appropriate way. But, the business retention is obviously what we need to be focusing on right now. But there's also the business attraction side. Mm-hmm. We're heavily invested in that and interested in that practice. So I wonder kind of what the balance looks like for you, or what the recommended balance should look like for any given community as we kind of holistically and strategically want to approach economic development, especially post-COVID.
Yeah, we're going to struggle with that in the post-COVID world because finances are just going to be real tight. I would tell you in a pre-COVID world, we would probably put maybe 25 or 30% of our economic development programming specific money into attraction. And we'd put the rest in the BRE side. And again, the reality is because as a regional player, our job is to make sure the companies that are already here are taken care of and expand and grow. And the challenge with attraction, and I saw this when I was in Ohio, it's really hard to make people outside of our area understand who you are and where you are and to care about that. There would be times when I represent the state of Ohio and I would go sit with people in a different country, and they'd have no idea where the entire state of Ohio is. And of course, I'm thinking, our state is bigger than your entire country. How can you not know where we are? And it just drove home the challenge of helping people understand where you are and why they should shop you. And so for our strategy is knowing kind of where we sit in the ecosystem from an attraction perspective. We're going to lean hard on the state of Kentucky and the Kentucky cabinet. They've got resources overseas. They've got, that expense has already been laid out for that. So we're going to try to dovetail in that, leverage off of them. I mentioned before, we're part of the Cincinnati metropolitan area. So we've got Ready Cincinnati as a partner of ours. They invest in business attraction. We're going to try especially over the next year, to leverage off of some of their investments, kind of, if not leverage, at least draft off of their investment. So because our spending will be down. So what I'd say is pre-COVID, we'd probably be 30% attraction, 70% business development in terms of spending over there. This year, it'll probably be 90-10. So,
yeah, us, time, finances, a lot of our members as well. And you're right about the challenge, especially on foreign direct investment, business attraction. I was always told, look, international businesses, they know the coasts, and then everything else is flyover, and they struggle with that. And I don't know that I believed that until I kind of got involved in KAED and until we had some visits at Select USA or spent some time in China last year. So I think, we need to figure out what our differentiator is, what's special about us, and kind of lean into it.
Yeah.
And, for us, on page 1 of our Kentucky presentation is a picture of Harlan Sanders, KFC. And I probably would have never guessed that would have been something that we had done. But we have Colonel Sanders right on there, Muhammad Ali, bourbon, Kentucky Derby. So anything that is intrinsic and unique to Kentucky, we're leaning into it. And we encourage communities to do that as well.
Yeah, Matt, we really are fortunate in this state because we do have some, icons that people recognize. And while Colonel Sanders, KFC is absolutely huge in Asia. I was in Australia a couple of years ago. I was shocked at how many KFC stores I saw. So it's an incredibly well-known brand around the world. So it's absolutely leverageable. Bourbon plays well. I can't tell you how many times I would be at an international conference when I was with Ohio, and Kentucky would crank out the bourbon, and you were just like, no, not, and so in Ohio being this great big state with a lot of resources, sometimes we would struggle a little bit with what was that one like icon that we could lever on. And, Matt, what I would share, especially for folks in the local and regional world of economic development, again, it's knowing what your responsibility is in this and having everybody aligned to do their job. So when I was with the state of Ohio, my job was to go and open the door and wave the flag. We had more money. We had a bigger name than a community would, and we could get to places and get those doors open. That was my job. And I would tell my community partners, but you know what I don't have? I don't have one worker. I don't have one piece of land. I don't have, any of that kind of stuff. So I can get the door open for you, but it's your job to make sure that you've got a good site, you've got a good workforce story, you've got all of those assets in place so that when we find that deal, we can execute it. And that's what we're doing here today. That's why we focus on BRE. It's why we focus on relationships with our community, so that when the cabinet happened this morning, we got a call from the cabinet. They have a really nice, attractive deal. We have a site. We have a workforce story, and we're pretty darn good at executing projects so that we can give that customer a good experience and they can shop for us. So the cabinet knows their role. They did a great job at it. We know our role. Hopefully we can win this thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective too, and that's so important. We have to be ready. The timing on this is so critical. People are looking to make decisions a week ago. So, quick, risk-free decisions and being able to hit the go button when needed is so important for this Commonwealth, and we try to do what we can through several initiatives there, including our product development initiative. But you mentioned hearing from the cabinet today, which is a good thing. So we always like to ask, how's project activity been recently?
Yeah, what's interesting about that, Matt, it's actually been really good. So again, when we talk about the decision we made back in early March to not draw back, since the beginning of March, I think as of beginning of this week, had like 25 new projects. So our monthly goal would be about 10, 11 projects a month. So let's call it 33 over the period. And we're at 25 in a COVID world. We're pretty excited about that. We've actually had announced wins go through KEDFA each of the months of May, April. We're fingers crossed next week for June. And we think we have a couple of things chambered up for July. So shockingly, project activity, a lot of people, they look at our business and they think that, well, you must be like some of the businesses that are shuttered. Unfortunately, we're very much different. We're seeing the activity like a hospital or, would see because of this thing. So we've been really busy.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. So a short amount of time, you've had a lot going on. And I think this is one of the busiest people that I know and one of the most successful. So talk to us about some major wins that have happened in your tenure.
Yeah, so we'll talk about a couple of recent ones and just some things that we're really happy about. So local company, Step CG, Covington company, technology oriented, the kind of things that everybody gets really excited about. So they had an announcement last week. They're growing. We worked really hard to make sure that we could find them a home in Kentucky. They're part of the Cincinnati metro area. Their talent, their workforce comes across the entire metro area. They shopped the whole metro area, and we needed to make sure we could find them the right home here. So we worked with Step CG to keep them in Covington. Was a really cool announcement for us. Just this week, we announced Hilltop, which is a company here in the Cincinnati metro. Their headquarters is actually going to move across the river into the River Center building, as they just looked at it and thought, boy, this is the right place for us. They kind of joked that their concrete went into making the River Center. It seemed appropriate that they would have a home in the River Center. So we worked on that. If you go back, just as I was coming on board, Atlas Airlines, they're a big, you probably haven't heard of those guys because they're not the plane you see when you step off on the tarmac to fly somewhere, but they're kind of the guy that provides the plane to the person who's going to fly it. They do a lot in the logistics space, a lot in moving cargo around. They decided to stay in Northern Kentucky, build a new facility in Erlanger. I drive by that building every day. It's great to see that it's still going up. So we were able to help them last year with that project. I think that'll be 600 people will be in that facility. So we, and again, sometimes you get lucky. Atlas was kind of queued up when we got here, and then we've been able to build some pipeline along the way to execute on those other deals.
Yeah. And it's always fun to tell a Kentucky's aerospace story when we're out traveling around, and there's certainly much of that is from Northern Kentucky, and we just thank you for the good work that you do in that space and others. And I think about we've mentioned a couple of times you're relatively new, but you're a seasoned Kentuckian by now. So I wonder maybe some challenges that you've encountered, and maybe how you flip those into opportunities for your benefit going forward.
Yeah, boy. So I'll tell you, we've had again, thinking about my colleagues and friends up at the cabinet and the challenge that they've had to live through over the last several months of, you have a transition from one governor to the next. Folks are new in their roles. They're dealing with the normal business of setting up a new state. And then just, once a 100-year pandemic comes along and disrupts everything that they're doing. So, really a significant challenge for those folks. We've tried to be a good partner for them. And it's tough because they're busy every day, but reaching out saying, what can we do? How can we help? Can we provide services to you? Is there anything that you would need from us so that we can help continue to execute on deals? And so trying to have those conversations with Jeff and his team, Commissioner Hayes, Secretary Hayes, to trying to serve them, even on the entrepreneurship side of the house. We provide the services for the Kentucky Innovation Network, and Tony Ellis was both in charge of helping the state get PPE and figure out what to do with the RISE grant. And so just making calls up there and say, how can we be a good partner for you? What can we do for you that helps the state ultimately is something I think we've done a pretty good job with.
Yeah. Shout out to Tony too. I mean, he's had a lot on his plate as he's kind of led the PPE charge from the cabinet, and then also on the innovation side. So he's a good partner to us. And on PPE, I think the state really came together. manufacturers, the partners like us, really came together to show, here's what we can do to address a challenge. Here's how interconnected and integrated that we are. And I think we responded, given the challenges, well on PPE production, PPE sourcing, and I think we definitely supplied it where it needed to go. And we've came together as we've kind of entered the phased reopening to make sure that there's the supply needed so that we get back on track. And I know we put a directory out, and there's a lot from Northern Kentucky that's came there that people are taking advantage of. So,
you know, Matt, there was a lot of just that. You know, we would have providers here that say, well, we're a distiller. We can make hand sanitizer. We don't have bottles. Or we'd say, hey, we have these unique bottles, but we're never going to make hand sanitizer, and connecting people like that. Or, you know, for Triad, one of the things that we did is we have a company here in Northern Kentucky called Gravity Labs, which is on the front line for the state for doing testing around COVID-19. All we did for Gravity Labs was just get out of their way. So before COVID-19, we actually shared a facility with Gravity. We probably had 70% of the facility. They had 30%. We saw this thing coming up, and we said, we need to get out of here, one, so that you guys can ramp up and scale. And so we basically shuttered our entrepreneurship offices just so they could ramp up. And it's been so successful that we actually worked then with the company Citus, who's been a good partner as well, to just so that Gravity could have all of our space on an ongoing basis to serve the state of Kentucky. So sometimes helping people is pretty easy, and getting out of the way was probably the simplest thing we could do.
Yeah, especially when you've got passionate, talented, capable partners like that. And yeah, thank you for mentioning Gravity. I'm sorry I didn't. I should have. What a partner that they've been as we searched through this. And you know, a lot of people are familiar with them because look, the governor's mentioned them almost in every one of his press conferences. So yeah, thank you to them. And you know, we've had a fantastic conversation here. A lot of softball questions at you. So it's time, and I don't know if they briefed you on this to go to the hot seat if you're ready. So
I'm a hilltopper, so I choose Big Red.
Okay. Okay. So favorite bourbon.
Oh, that's a great question. You know, to me, I'm a under $50 bourbon guy, and so there's tons of them. I just started drinking Woodford Rye, so not a bourbon, but just started drinking Woodford Rye. I love that a lot. So at the moment, that would probably be the one I would grab right off of the shelf.
Okay.
Four Roses Single Barrel would be right behind it.
Okay, we write them down. Okay, favorite band. I think I know.
Oh, that's a tough question. You know, if you go back to when I was in college, it would be Elvis Presley. No, I'm just kidding. You know, it would be probably like U2. Kind of my adulthood would be the Foo Fighters. I love the Foo Fighters. But I've really been into like Old Crow and Avett Brothers and Sturgill Simpson the last couple of years. So I'm going to go with 5 favorite bands, U2 through Sturgill Simpson.
Yeah, I really like Sturgill Simpson right now. And then Old Crow and the Avett Brothers. That was big when I was in college. So we were big on them. Okay, this one will get you in trouble. If you answer it, where's the best place to eat in Northern Kentucky?
Oh, that is a great question. You know, I'll give you a recent choice. I left the office the other day. I'd had a really bad day. I was in a really bad mood, and I stopped at Camparoso, which is around the corner here. And you ever see the marshmallow test with little kids? They give them a marshmallow, and they put it in the middle of the table, and they wait to see if they don't eat it, they get another marshmallow. So I had this pizza in my front seat of my car, and I was angry and I was grumpy, and I ate the entire thing before I got home to Covington, which is about 5 miles away. So at the moment, probably my comfort food was Camparoso pizza.
Okay.
Don't tell anybody I ate a whole pizza before I drove home, though, please.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't have that. Okay, so we'll send some to your office randomly. Okay. Who would play you in a movie when they make the movie about you in a few years?
Oh boy. Well, hopefully it has a happy ending. You know, I could say Bruce Willis, but I have much better hair than Bruce Willis does, so I'm gonna take him out. You know, I watched Jimmy Kimmel the other night, and Matt Damon was on there, so I'm gonna go with Matt Damon will play me. Although I think I'm taller than Matt Damon, so may have to boost him up a little bit. I'm gonna go with Matt Damon.
Okay. Yeah, I see it. And
George Clooney, way too pretty. I would never say George Clooney.
Yeah, I get Vince Vaughn all the time. You know, I guess because we always look tired and like we need.
I can see that. Not the tired thing. Probably, you know, I'm going to get Will Ferrell.
Yeah.
I'm going to get shirtless Will Ferrell playing me in a movie.
Oh gosh. Matt Damon works. Okay.
All right, let's go back to that.
And last one, what's your favorite hobby when you're not out there creating jobs?
You know, it's almost anything with water. So I own a sailboat. I love to sail. We bought some paddle boards last year. Love to paddleboard. Taught my kids. I didn't teach them. My kids and I, we love to go scuba diving. So generally speaking, if there's water involved, I'm in. Even frozen water. I learned to ski last year. So anything with water, I am generally in on.
Okay. Well, we got it. Hey, I think we made it. I think you're off the hot seat. We did.
Perfect. I survived.
So I appreciate you indulging us on these. You know, we try and have fun, and it's about kind of keeping us networked and connected and getting to know each other better. So thanks for that. And it's been a lot of fun. I think we've got a lot of best practices. We've learned a lot. I can't wait to get this out to our community. So before we part, do you have any final words?
You know, Matt, I would tell you the thing I love about economic development is about service. How do you help your community grow and do better and be better? And so for the folks that are watching, if there's anything we can do for them, if there's a question we can answer, if there's something that they need that our, you know, resources or experience would help, we'd be thrilled to help out with them. So tell them not to hesitate to pick up the phone, shoot us an email, and we'll do what we can for them.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, because there's certainly power in convergence of KAED. And what I've noticed is you're right. We're all only a phone call away, and there's a ton of intellectual capital with people like you in this association. We're all in it together in a lot of ways. So I just, Lee Crume, President and CEO of Northern Kentucky Triad, thank you, sir, for your time, and we hope you have a great day.
Yep. Cheers, Matt. Thank you.